There was a story that broke last week that thankfully didn't really make much traction in the general news outlets around sports media. It was more amongst the West Ham fan base. Now, I'd actually seen it originally on Hammer's Chat, and then I think then it sort of morphed. It grew and grew and grew throughout the day. We obviously picked up on it as well, and we reported it on our website, and now we're here talking about it on the channel. So it was regarding Vladimir Coufal and the comments that he's made about David Moyes. I've got actually, I'll tell you what, there's sort of three parts to what he said. Basically, he's gone away on international duty with the Czech Republic. And this is quite a common theme, actually, with Coufal. And you'll see this previously, that when he goes away with the national team, he tends to talk quite openly about West Ham and what's going on, which, don't get me wrong, I quite like. I like the fact he's being honest and being open. But you do wonder what the club are doing about it, what their views are on all of this, because it's a bit of a trait, I think, this season. This is not something new. This is not, and it's not just Coufal. We've seen it with various players. Mainly, I would say Mikel Antonio. He's come out and said a few comments about the manager, about the playing style. But Coufal has been very open in his recent interview. Now, it was picked up, and the interview wasn't, as I say, it wasn't really widespread news in the sort of general media. And I actually think that's a bit. I'm quite grateful that's happened, because I think the comments that he said are quite damning, and they don't really, they basically create more questions than they answer. Do you know what I mean? That it really is a bit of an issue when you look at what he's saying and thinking, right, I personally don't see it as complimentary at all for what he said about David Moyes, about the club. I just don't think this is a very good situation to be in. Now, what we've done is I just want to talk about a couple of points he's made. First of all, he was talking about Moyes and the fact that he's under pressure. Now, I know people will say, well, that's obvious. Of course he's under pressure. And yeah, that is true. But what was quite interesting about what Coufal said was that the players were very aware that David Moyes had to beat Nottingham Forest, had to beat Everton, and another game he picked out. Otherwise, he'd have lost his job. Now, that is a totally going against everything that David Moyes has said, against Declan Rice has said. Declan Rice has basically made it very clear, we don't listen to any noise, we're not interested in that, we don't take any notice of it. Well, they clearly do, because Coufal clearly does, because he made it very clear we were very aware that if he didn't win this game, he was going to lose his job. So, although these aren't massive things, because it was kind of like, well, obvious. You'd think, well, they probably are a bit aware of this. The news bit for me is the fact that he's going against what the club is saying. He's going against what David Moyes has been saying. So it's making David Moyes look a bit stupid here. It's making the club look a bit foolish that they're officially making these statements, officially saying things. Let's not forget these players are media trained, okay? They know that their words carry weight. They know that whatever they say will go out straight into the media. People will pick up on it, blah, blah, blah. And it will go across social media and all these things. So, and Coufal's an experienced footballer. You know, he's been around the game for a while. So you do wonder what the situation is with him and the manager and his future at the football club. The one thing we didn't report on, and I believe that Coufal did say as well, before I carry on, was about him being in London. Now, he apparently alludes to the fact he doesn't actually like living in England. He doesn't enjoy it, but he loves playing in the Premier League. So he sacrifices that. But basically, I think he says that he goes away from England as much as possible. So not sure. I mean, for me, it screams that his future, certainly under David Moyes, isn't going to be a long one. That's the way I read into it. So I'm just got it down here. So the comments that he made. First of all, I want to talk about what he said about the game and the fact he was under pressure. So basically, he'd said, these are Coufal's exact words. There were some reports in the media that we have to win, otherwise the coach was then in danger, with Everton, Nottingham Forest, and most recently at Aston Villa. But however, I read an interview where David Moyes said he had a great relationship with the board. Now, I'll just say, I don't want to try and read too much into these, because I don't want to create something out of nothing. But that sounds a little bit like a bit of a dig there. That sounds a bit like, well, yeah, we know he's in trouble, but he's all right because he's got a good relationship with the board. I don't know. It's hard to understand. I mean, and also we weren't there to listen to, we're only going by what we're reading. So it's hard sometimes to get a complete understanding of the manner of the way he's saying things. But I don't read that as great. I think he's saying, well, we knew he was under pressure there. We thought he was going to get sacked, but, we know he's a good mate with Sullivan. That's how I'm reading it. A bit of a strange comment to make. And also, this is what he said, which we'll come on to a little bit more in a bit. He said, I can't say from my position in terms of Moyes' future, I don't sit on the board. And then he said, that is a question for our future owner. and he was alluding to Daniel Krasinski. Now, again, he could be saying this very tongue-in-cheek, a bit jokey, but that's as I've said earlier, these words carry weight. He's very aware that this is going to go places, what he's saying. So it's interesting. That's really, really interesting. But before we go into the Krasinski comment, I just want to quickly look at the other comment he said about David Moyes. So he was asked about David Moyes and his style. Pure pragmatist, he said. The ends justify the means. I've probably never seen such an orthodox pragmatist when he has results at the expense of everything, maybe sometimes even the game. Again, you read that and think, right, ends justify the means, so that he's essentially saying, look, it might be awful, but we get the result at the end. So is that a compliment? Not sure. But then the fact he said he will put at the expense of everything, even the match. So to me, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this and what you think is what he means by this, but I think what he's basically saying is he plays shit football. We don't enjoy it. That's how I'm reading that. We don't enjoy the style of football. We don't enjoy it. And he said, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on him, and he puts pressure on us as well. Now, all I'm saying is I read that and say that's what he's saying. He doesn't like the style of football, but that's what we're trying to do, get results out of it. At no point in any of this interview do I get any compliments. I don't see any real complimentary stuff going towards David Moyes. I mean, as I say, end justified means you kind of think, is that a compliment? Is he saying, well, it's a bit crap, but he gets the result in the end? Maybe. But ultimately, I don't think these are great comments towards the manager at all. I read that and do think that there is serious worries there in terms of his relationship with Moyes. I don't think it's that great. And if I was David Moyes, and at the end of the day, David Moyes is still our football manager, and that has to be respected, the fact that is his position. That's not great. You know what I mean? I'm sure he'll be aware of this. I'm sure the club will be very aware of this interview. And that is going against, one, everything we've said, and really, two, you're calling out the manager, like we've had a couple of times before. And obviously, I want to talk about the Krasinski comment. Now, again, I think that could be tongue-in-cheek, could be a little bit jokey, but Krasinski's a Czech Republic, from a national, Czech national, as is COUFAL. I do believe they probably know each other. I'm sure they've had conversations at some stage. And the fact he's now saying our future owner, again, I don't want to take it too seriously and go, well, COUFAL must know something. He's basically saying for a fact. But it's interesting. I think it's something to keep your eye on. I mean, we've obviously got a lot of huge question marks regarding the future of the club at the moment. We've got this embarrassment clause has now expired. I do think things are a little bit on hold at the moment. Obviously, we've got some situations within the club, and that's obviously very sad in terms of the Gold family. David's just passed, and obviously, when Jacqueline, his daughter's also just recently passed as well. So, which is very, very sad. So, it's a delicate subject, that one, and you kind of think, okay, just let that kind of do it. We're not quite sure what's going to happen there. But, of course, we've got a relegation battle on our hands as well. So, that does make the ownership situation a little bit, I imagine, on hold a little bit at the moment. But the fact he said that makes you think, okay, is something in there with Daniel Krasinski? Not sure. But very, very interesting interview this from COUFAL. As I say, he's not held back at all. He was also then asked on his future at the football club, because he was under, during the summer and during January, that where he was going to be staying or not. There was interest from Germany and what have you. Now, he alluded to the fact there was a list of players that David Moyes had, the players that he was going to let go. And he said, I don't even know where this list came from. Nobody said anything like that to my face. And I think David Moyes would have done. Right after the World Cup, he called me and said I was very important to him, and it was a mistake that I didn't play. A mistake that I didn't play as only a few matches. He held me and said if I'd planned to leave somewhere, he wouldn't never let me go. Now, again, very interesting. A bit of a strange comment. Can't quite work out what we're getting there out of this interview. Whether it's something that he's trying to, again, it's hard to understand when you're just reading it, because you don't know the manner in which he's saying things, but. Ultimately, it looks like the club were going to let him go, and David Moyes has effectively last minute made a U-turn and kept COUFAL. Ex-WHU employee did do some updates on this over the course of the summer and whatnot, and over January. And I think basically West Ham were looking for a replacement and didn't get one over the line. So I think that actually was one of the reasons why that COUFAL was kept on. And let's be honest, I'm glad he has, because he's actually been performing pretty well up to his heel injury. But these are interesting comments and really quite damning. And I can't imagine it's done great for the mood around the club and the situation of David Moyes. Don't get me wrong, it's not massive. It's not huge. At the end of the day, Coufal is not a fringe player, but he's someone I don't imagine it's going to have a horrendous cause massive issues within the dressing room. But it's interesting. It's very interesting, to say the least. And one that you kind of wonder now, where does this put David Moyes? Again, it kind of just screams to me that there is a bit of unrest in that squad, that they're just not happy. We've had it, as I said, with Antonio before, now with Coufal. And these aren't minor little comments. These are quite big. These are big statements. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Now, Dave and X, I'm sure we'll be discussing this on the West Ham Way podcast. It's going to be out today. So by the time that this is actually out on YouTube, the podcast will be out and they're going to be discussing it. So it's going to be very interesting, very interesting. But X will be providing updates of what's going on behind the scenes and really how this has now affected the squad and what the situation is between David Moyes and Vladimir Coufal.